Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of English Lessons with Grammar Man. Today I have another video for you on a very common error, and that is the use of the word since and the word for. Many people mix up these two words and use them out of context, use them incorrectly. So today, first I want to find out if you're using them incorrectly, and if you are, I'm going to teach you a trick so that you never mix these words up again. So what I'll do is I'll give you 3 sentences and I want you to decide whether the sentences are correct and which ones are incorrect. Sentence number 1. I've lived here since 5 years. I've lived here since 5 years. Sentence number 2. She's worked here for 10 years. She's worked here for 10 years. And sentence number 3. He's been living in Australia since 1 year. He's been living in Australia since 1 year. So I'll give you a few seconds to decide which of those sentences were grammatically correct and which of those sentences were grammatically incorrect. Time is up, okay? So, if you thought that sentence number 1 and sentence number 3 were incorrect, then you're a grammatical champion today and you can watch one of my more advanced videos. But if you thought that sentence 1 and 3 were correct, then I suggest watching the rest of this video because they are both wrong and I'm going to explain why. The good news with the rule or the rules for for and since is very simple, and I have a brilliant trick so that you never mix up which word to use. Let's get straight into it. The rule for when to use since is we only use since when we mention a starting point of an activity. We only use since when we mention a starting point of an activity. And we only use for when we mention a duration, a length of time. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of an incorrect sentence. I've lived here since 5 years. Completely incorrect. Don't ever say this. The reason it is incorrect is because 5 years is a length of time. It's a duration. So we have to use the word for. I've lived here for 5 years. It's not a starting point. I've lived here since 5 years. Doesn't make sense because 5 years, there's no starting point. If we wanted to use the word since, we have to say, I've lived here since 2012. I've lived here since 2012. Then we can use since it has a starting point. Now the way to remember this is that since starts with S, since, and starting point. Starting point starts with S. Starting point. So if there is a starting point, we must use since. I've lived here since 2012. I've lived here for 5 years. And that brings us to our second example. She's worked here for 10 years. She's worked here for 10 years. This sentence is correct. It is a duration, so we use the word for. Doesn't have a starting point, so we can't use the word since. And finally, we have sentence number 3, which I gave you. It was an incorrect sentence, so I'll give you the incorrect sentence. He's been living in Australia since 1 year. He's been living in Australia since 1 year. Incorrect. Don't ever say this sentence. But what I'd like you to do now, because now that you know the rules of when to use since and when to use for, is to think about this sentence and think, why is it incorrect? Why is it incorrect? And then I want you to say out loud to your phone or your laptop, or whatever you're watching me on, I want you to say the rule nice and loud. Say the reason why it is incorrect. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Good. Hopefully you said, Grammar Man, it's an incorrect sentence because you mentioned a duration, not a starting point. You mentioned a duration, 1 year. You should have used the word for. There was no starting point and you used the word since. Bad grammar man. That's what you said, isn't it? Good. So you could say, he's been living in Australia for 1 year. That would be a correct sentence. 1 year is the duration, we use the word for. Now if we wanted to use the word since, we would have to say, he's been living in Australia since 2016. That's a correct sentence. It's got a starting point, we can use since. Or you could say, he's been living in Australia since March last year. He's been living in Australia since March last year. Starting point, use since. Duration, use for. And that's the rules, everybody. I hope now that you can use the words since and for correctly in a sentence. I'm sure you can, as long as you remember the rules. Remember the rule with the S. S, since, and S, starting point. That's the key rule. That's the trick to remembering. So thanks a lot for watching. As always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our new content. We're uploading videos 3 times per week now. And yes, good luck with all your learning goals. Cheers.